Welcome to Thursday's edition of COVID-19. We are marking a second day of cases in the 400s, but authorities are urging for continued public vigilance. Also today, in line with this week's focus on our one-year battle against the pandemic, we are poised to focus on the economic repercussions of the global health crisis. But first, I have our Kwon So-ah standing by with the pandemic updates. Right, So-ah, what's the latest for this Thursday?
Well, Sunny, the slow downward trend appears to be continuing with 401 infections reported this Thursday, which is a tiny drop from yesterday. We do, however, see a rise in domestically transmitted infections while imported cases went down a little bit. And if we take a look at our graph now, we had 500s for quite some time and then dropped down to the 300s. And now we're seeing a slight upward trend to the 400s. And with that, the total number of cases here in Korea stands at 73,918, the death toll at 1,316, and we have around 11,750 people who remain in quarantine or under treatment. Now, by region, Gyeonggi-do province had the highest number of infections this Thursday at 138, followed by 125 in the capital Seoul and 23 in Incheon. And although Jeollabuk-do province, although better off than many other places, has now hit the 1,000 mark in total infections.
I see. So meanwhile, I understand government officials are looking for ways to better support small businesses that have been hit by social distancing guidelines.
Exactly, Sunny. Although some businesses were allowed to reopen recently, others, such as nightlife and entertainment venues, have been closed for far too long, which has been acknowledged by Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun at an earlier meeting this morning. And he noted that earlier support measures, such as emergency handouts and extra budgets, were not enough.
We need to provide adequate support to those who weren't able to run their businesses normally due to the government's disease control measures. And now is the time to consider working on laws and regulations to support them.
The Prime Minister also expressed great optimism for the vaccination program that's to start in Korea next month, while an internal document by the World Health Organization reportedly says emergency use approval for the AstraZeneca vaccine may likely be granted as early as this month, and the green light for Moderna's vaccine in February, while Janssen may be approved by May or June. But the timeline for approval may vary according to country, as AstraZeneca's vaccine produced by India, for instance, may be approved by the end of this month, but in Korea by the end of February. Now let's take a closer look at the figures here. The U.S. now added some 192,000 new cases in a day as new President Biden vowed the country can overcome the COVID-19 pandemic, but he also warned that the country is entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period so far. Meanwhile, the UK has surpassed 3.5 million cases in total, and Spain has more cases than Turkey now at 2.4 million. And also South Africa as well as Indonesia have similar numbers of increases at 12,000 new infections in the span of 24 hours. And the global tally now stands at 97.3 million, and we added some 17,600 new fatalities in just a day. And those are the updates I have for now. I'll be back in a bit after the government briefing. Sunny?
All right, So thank you for now. Right, for more coverage of the COVID-19 situation here in Korea, I have our Kim Ji-yeon in the studio with me. Welcome, Ji-yeon.
Hello again.
Right, let's start with the latest on the vaccination front, Ji-yeon. There has been some more positive news, I hear.
That's right. The South Korean government said that negotiations are underway so that the country can secure additional vaccines for 20 million people from U.S. drug manufacturer Novavax instead of the initial volume for 10 million. The government has thus far purchased enough vaccines to cover 56 million people. But if the deal with Novavax comes through, that means Korea would have enough doses to vaccinate 76 million in total, well above the country's population of around 52 million. Last year, South Korea had inked a separate contract manufacturing agreement with Novavax as well as AstraZeneca. During a tour of a coronavirus vaccine production facility in Andong on Wednesday, President Moon Jae-in emphasized the significance of South Korea's vaccine sovereignty.
이번 계약은 생산뿐 아니라 기술 이전까지 받는 특별한 의미가 있습니다. 백신의 지속적이고 공평한 보급을 확보하고 우리 백신 개발을 앞당기는 데도 큰 역할을 할 것입니다. 코로나가 단기간에 퇴치되지 않을 경우 안정적인 접종과 자주권 확보를 위해 백신의 국내 개발은 매우 중요합니다.
You know, like many other COVID-19 vaccines, the ones from Novavax require 2 shots spaced 3 weeks apart.
I see. Staying with Novavax, Chiang, can you tell us a bit more about how its vaccine works?
Well, the coronavirus is studied with proteins that it uses to enter the human cells called spike proteins. And the Novavax vaccine is a protein subunit vaccine, which means it uses a lab-made version of the spike protein. And it works by teaching the immune system to make antibodies to the spike protein. And the vaccines for the modern flu, HPV, and hepatitis B all use a similar approach. And it only requires regular refrigeration, whereas the BioNTech, Pfizer, and Moderna vaccines employ messenger RNA that teach our cells to make spike proteins. And both of these require freezing and even super freezing for distribution. The vaccine candidate from AstraZeneca and Janssen use a modified benign virus to vary DNA that produces the virus's spike protein. If all goes well, the Novavax vaccine may be distributed locally during the second quarter this year.
That's good to know. Now, Chiang, when exactly is the first shipment of COVID-19 vaccines poised to enter the country?
Well, the date is not yet set, but the government said it's making preparations so once they do arrive, they can distribute it right away. And the Korean government said it's still in negotiation with manufacturers so that COVID-19 vaccines for 50,000 people can arrive early next month, according to Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun in a radio interview with local media on Wednesday. Also, he said there is a possibility that the doses for 10 million people secured via the COVAX facility is to arrive in South Korea early next month as well. Medical workers are expected to be the first in line for inoculation. And Seoul's defense ministry says it's in consultation with other related ministries to spell out the military's role in the transportation of the vaccines once they arrive in the country. It's to release details about its plan as early as next week.
Okay, then. Before you go, Chiang, tell us a bit about the report that has been released by authorities here regarding the outbreak at a correctional facility in the country, in the capital city.
Right, that's right. In an intermediary finding released Wednesday, authorities say the first wave of COVID-19 in a correctional facility in Seoul last November was sparked by an infected staff member, but the second wave in mid-December was triggered by new inmates who were asymptomatic carriers of the virus. There are a number of reasons, but overcrowding and lack of testing were cited as the main factors that fueled the spread. And up until now, more than 1,200 cases have been reported at correctional facilities nationwide. And there's more when taking into account family members and acquaintances of the prison staff who have contracted the virus. And to prevent the spread of COVID-19 at detention centers, the Ministry of Justice have released some 900 inmates earlier this month, and more inmates could be considered for parole next Friday.
I see. All right, Chiang, as always, thank you very much for that coverage.
Thank you.
Right, it's time now for the regular briefing on COVID-19 here in Korea for this Thursday. And while we wait for that to start, let's take another look at the extension of the social distancing guidelines in the country until the end of this month. Right, I understand the briefing is about to start. We'll come back to you afterwards with a summary of it.
총괄 단장의 설명이 있겠습니다.
Let us now begin our regular briefing for January 21st, Thursday. As of today midnight, we have 380 new local infections and 21 new imported cases. The total caseload now stands at 73,918.
의심 신고 검사자 수는
We had a total of
45,480명이고
45,480 people tested with suspicious symptoms. And in the metropolitan test sites, the temporary test sites, we had 20,000 tests conducted, and a total of 66,100 cases of tests were conducted yesterday. We have a total of 317 patients with severe or critical conditions, a drop by 5, and we had 16 additional fatalities. I extend my deepest condolences to the deceased and the members of the bereaved families. Here are our major updates of domestic infections nationwide. We see today 380 infections, and by region, in the metropolitan area, we have 277 cases, and 18 in Chungcheong province, Honam 23, and Gyeongnam area 36 people. And this is a slight increase from the day before. And in Gyeongbuk, we have 15, and in Gangwon-do province, we have 6, and in Jeju Island, we have 5, which are a slight drop from yesterday. And also, we have some updates on our cluster infections. First of all, in Seoul City's Gangnam-gu district, in relation to Asana, we also identified a total of 17 people, and we have a total of 18 confirmed cases to date. And in Gyeonggi-do province, Guri City, in relation to a senior welfare facility, we also had 4 additional confirmed cases, and a total of 6 others as well, and a total of 10 people have been confirmed to date. And in Gyeonggi-do province, Gwangmyeong City, in relation to an insurance company, we have 13 additional cases being confirmed. In total, the total stands at 14. And in Gyeonggi-do province, Yongin City, in relation to a church, we have 16 additional cases being confirmed, and in total, we have 224 cases being confirmed to date. And in Chungcheong province, in relation to Cheonan City, we have also identified 5 additional cases there, and in total, we have 6 cases being confirmed to date. And next, in Gyeongbuk province, in Sangju City, in relation to a family gathering, we identified 10 additional cases, and in total, 11 have been confirmed to date. Lately, we are seeing cluster infections also centering around business operations, including post offices as well as insurance companies. And next, we would like to go over the trend of COVID-19 during the past year. In 2020, from January 2020 until the 19th of January 2021, we have a total of 73,115 cases being confirmed to date, and the fatality stands at 1.75%. And especially, we have identified that 61% were between the age group of 20 to 50. And also, we had a high average of the proportion for those over this age of 60. And we also confirmed that 45% were related to cluster infections. And as for these cluster infections, major facilities were religious facilities. So these accounted for the majority, followed by nursing hospitals and nursing care centers, which are virus vulnerable facilities. And also indoor and outdoor sports facilities, cram schools, and restaurants, cafes, as well as nightlife entertainment venues, including clubs and bars, as well as the door-to-door sales. And we identified that within closed spaces and at crowded spaces, they were prone to the virus infection. And also, we had major cluster infections breaking out at facilities where people could not wear face masks. And as for these facilities of cluster infections, indoor facilities like indoor gyms and cram schools, as well as the door-to-door sales, they have been reopening starting from Monday here in the metropolitan area. And we have decided to reopen them because to consider the many hardships that are entailed by the small business owners, and this does not mean that we are seeing a stable third outbreak. So we advise all of the people, especially workers and also users of these facilities, to abide by these antivirus measures like wearing face masks and prevention of consuming food or beverage. Nevertheless, nightlife entertainment venues and poker bars, we still have a gathering ban put in place at these facilities. However, we still have some breaches of illegal operation of these facilities. Starting from January, at our Safety e-Report app, we have seen that some of the reports have been centering around the illegal operation of these nightlife entertainment venues. And major reports were that these nightlife entertainment venues open their doors through late at night, and also they had their VIP consumers, and also they had only operations during the weekends, and also they had a separate door to enable the customers inside their facilities. And the government, going forward, we will be carrying out intensified quarantine measures as well as on-site inspections for these facilities going forward. And next, as for the virus vulnerable facilities, we are carrying out preemptive massive testing, and here are some updates. Starting from the January 8th to 14th, here are some updates during this week. And out of about 12,000 facilities subject to the tests, we had about 93% of them that were tested. And as for the target, we had over 100% of our target. And we have identified a total of 25 confirmed patients at 21 facilities. And 118% of testings were conducted at nursing hospitals, and about 100% were conducted at mental hospitals, and also at the disabled welfare facilities. We have carried out testings of 118%, and we would like to thank all of the staff members as well as the residents there for your cooperation. And we are seeing, however, a less tests, insufficient amount of tests conducted at nursing hospitals and long-term care centers, and we would like to highlight that these preemptive testings is crucial to protect the safety and the lives of these vulnerable people, so we ask for your cooperation going forward. And starting from January 20th last year, when we had the first report of the domestic case here in South Korea, exactly 1 year has passed, and we had 3 major outbreaks here in South Korea. Nonetheless, we were able to contain the virus, and thanks to the cooperation put forth by the members of the public. And right now, we are fighting over the third wave right now. And even as we speak now, we have many people, especially medical staff members, as well as epidemiological investigators and public officials, and also many other quarantine officials who are exerting their full efforts to contain the virus. And there are also many public institutions who I need to thank as well for their cooperation. In addition, as for the antivirus measures, these has inflicted great harms and damages to many self-employed as well as micro business owners, and we would like to thank you for your cooperation and apologize at once for such damages. However, we have been carrying out massive testing and tracing as well as treatment to overcome the virus, and we utilize IT technology to contain the virus further. In addition, we also put in place special entry measures, and we intensified our border security against the virus to stop the influx of imported cases. During the past year, we have been fighting against this novel coronavirus, and this was possible as we fought over these challenges. It was all possible thanks to the public's unity and cooperation, and I sincerely hope that we can do the same to fight any challenges that we will face during the year 2021. We believe that this year will be an year as we step towards overcoming the COVID-19 and concluding the COVID-19 pandemic. And the government will exert our full efforts to establish policies based on scientific measures, scientific evidences. We will also provide transparent information as well. Thank you very much.
지금부터 기자님들 질문에 답변 드리는 시간 갖겠습니다.
Right, there was Im Suk-young with Thursday's afternoon briefing. So what did she have to say?
Well, she first had an update on the recent infections here in the nation, which were linked to a religious facility, a family gathering, a sauna, but also a post office. And she stressed that recently there's been a higher number of cases linked to workplaces such as post offices and also insurance companies. She also had an evaluation of at which places infections have occurred during the past year. And again, religious facilities and medical facilities were at high risk. And she also mentioned that although recently cram schools, gyms and door-to-door businesses have opened, this should not be mistaken this should not be translated into that the country has a lower risk of infections. Also mentioning that there are still some places that are operating illegal businesses such as nightlife entertainments, venues which should still be closed. She also mentioned that some 12,000 facilities such as medical facilities are conducting massive testings, including 25 infections were confirmed at such facilities recently.
I see. All right, so thank you very much for that. I'll see you again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Up next, we take a look at an entity that seeks a united front against COVID-19 by ensuring fair access to diagnostics, treatments, and most importantly, vaccines. Do take a look.
Vaccination campaigns are well underway in many nations across the world, and plans for a rollout are also being finalized here in Korea.
지금 백신 첫 접종이 2월 말 또는 3월 초 이렇게 될 거라는 것은 우리 방역 당국이 이미 이제 밝힌 바가 있는데 지금으로서는 코박스 물량이 가장 먼저 들어올 가능성이 있습니다.
As of now, Korea has secured enough COVID-19 vaccines to inoculate some 56 million people. Of these, doses to cover 10 million people have been secured through the COVAX facility. COVAX is a global vaccine procurement initiative launched in April 2020 as a collaboration between Gov'T, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and the World Health Organization. High-income nations that have joined COVAX as self-financing participants pay into the facility while pooling resources for vaccine development and purchase. There's also a financial support mechanism called the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment to help ensure vaccine access for the world's poorest countries.
The goal for COVAX is to ensure equitable allocation of doses between all participating economies, regardless of the level. We are attempting to achieve a global rollout of vaccines that we don't fully yet know the properties of at a speed many times faster. As some of my colleagues have said, this is one of the greatest logistical undertakings we have had to face and the world has had to face. And it is a big challenge that can only be faced if we pool in a united way.
Around 190 countries, including Korea, have signed up to join the COVAX facility. COVAX aims to start distributing vaccines in the first half of 2021, with the goal of inoculating 20% of all citizens among its participating nations by the end of the year. However, some observers fear that the COVAX facility could fall short in delivering on its promises due to various issues related to financing, regulatory approval, and vaccine nationalism.
It was what we predicted, that some countries would put the nationalism before the need for the whole world to be vaccinated, before the need for solidarity to achieve the end of this pandemic. And we have seen some countries buy up huge numbers of the doses. And this is a problem because it means that the manufacturers naturally, if you come to me with a big pile of cash, the manufacturers understandably may be more willing to provide the doses to those countries.
Korea has done its share to help its less fortunate neighbors, donating some $10 million to the COVAX AMC program. Gavi is continuing to encourage high-income nations to make solidarity contributions for the benefit of poorer countries.
Higher income countries taking part in COVAX does not mean that doses are taken away from lower countries. On the contrary, the bigger the COVAX is, the more countries take part, the better we'll be able to sign deals for doses that benefit everyone, because we are able to negotiate advantageous bilateral deals. So South Korea is doing the right thing. It is needed in the COVAX. Its presence means that we can assure equitable access to vaccines.
It is hoped that the COVAX facility will make vaccines widely available and affordable as a public good to be shared among all citizens of the world.
(2020년에) OECD 모든 국가들이 다 마이너스 성장을 했지만 한국은 그래도 가장 선방을 해서 거시경제는 성공을 거두더라도 국민들의 삶이 회복되고 또 국민들이 이런 고용이 또 회복되고 하는 데에는 보다 긴 시간이 걸릴 수 있습니다.
Compared to its global partners, Korea has seen its economy fare relatively well in the face of the pandemic. Now, today, we'll look at the factors behind this reality and the prospects for 2021. I have Professor Yang Jun-seok from the Catholic University of Korea. Welcome back, Professor Yang.
Happy to be here.
And joining today's session virtually is Director Jeremy Zook of the Asia Pacific Sovereign Ratings Team at Fitch Ratings. Pleasure to have you with us, Mr. Zook.
Hello, great to be here with you.
Right, Professor Yang, let's begin with your assessment of the Korean economy in the wake of the pandemic.
Okay, well, as we saw in that slide that we had slightly before, Korea is on track to having well, I wouldn't say the best because the numbers are all negative, but still the least bad number in the OECD and second least bad number in G20 countries. Only China among the major economies are expected to have a positive growth, and then Korea is expected to have, the official numbers are not out yet, minus 1.1%, which is better than all other OECD countries and all other G20 countries except China. Now, how did that happen? Partially because Korea did its quarantine very well. If you look at the reason why other countries had such negative growth, it usually comes down to the second quarter shutdown and lockdown that a lot of countries had to try to control the coronavirus. And Korea never went into such full lockdown and shutdown. We still ran the factories. We still kept most of the stores working. So we never went into a complete shutdown that, say, the United States or parts of Europe did. Now, as a result of that, Korea will probably have this year's growth, 2021 growth, will probably not be as good as some of these other countries because, well, before the coronavirus, Korea was not having a very rapid growth to begin with. And what happened was that nothing fundamental about the economy changed during the coronavirus while receiving negative shocks. Now, some of that negative shock will disappear during 2021, but the fundamentals that we had before the coronavirus will continue. So we expect the growth rate, the government's expectation is about 3.2%. That comes down to recovering from the minus 1.1% growth that we had this year, plus the 2% growth that we had in 2019. So I'm sorry to say that perhaps because we weren't as bad last year, our growth will probably not be as good this year, but that should not take away from the fact that we were able to avoid full shutdown and lockdown because we did quarantine fairly well.
Right. Mr. Zook, last year Fitch Ratings downgraded the credit ratings of all major economies, but Korea for itself saw its credit rating steady at AA- with a stable outlook. What was the rationale behind this outlook?
Yeah, last year was certainly quite a significant year in terms of the number of downgrades that we had. And that was a result, of course, of the economic and fiscal deteriorations that we saw as a result of the pandemic. For Korea, we did maintain that AA- rating and kept the outlook unstable in our latest review in October. What that really boils down to is Korea's relative resilience, as we've discussed, during the coronavirus pandemic. Now, of course, Korea, has been hit by the pandemic. Growth has taken a significant knock in 2020. Public finances also deteriorated, but the domestic control of the virus that Korea was able to implement with its policies that didn't necessitate a full shutdown really helped to support both the economy and public finances more broadly. And so that relative resilience to what we see as other peer sovereigns helped to maintain Korea's stable outlook and stable rating. So while Korea did have quite some significant stimulus this past year, because the economy didn't contract quite as sharply as others, that amount of the increase in the fiscal deficit in Korea and the increase in the debt ratio, while large by Korean historical standards, just wasn't nearly as large as in other sovereigns, which helped to maintain our view on Korea as being a relatively stable in a credit sense.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor Yang, Moody's recently assessed the environment, social and governance management of 144 nations, and the top grade was given to 11 countries, including South Korea. Could you tell us a bit more about this recognition?
Okay, well, there has been more and more attention on socially beneficial, socially responsible investment. Now, organizations like Fitch and S&P, they're basically ratings agencies, so they grade investments. And usually when you grade investments, you grade whether the organization which borrowed the money can pay the money back. But because there has been so much interest in socially responsible investments, they're basically grading these companies also for how socially responsible they are, environment, corporate governance, and so on. So they look at certain factors concerning the environment, governance, social responsibility, and they grade according to that criteria. Korea, we usually tend to do well on tests. We know which areas that we're being graded in, and those are the areas that companies and the government concentrated on. So we got graded very well on those items. That should, first of all, I think, show the world that Korea is responsible, socially responsible. We're running the economy in a socially responsible way. And then the direct outcome from the ratings would be that our investment will probably, international investment, foreign investment will probably increase, because not only will we attract people who are after profits, but people who want to invest in socially responsible companies and socially responsible countries. And then in addition, I think there's going to be an indirect effect where you can say, well, Korea has a very good environmental company reputation, so those companies will be able to show to the world that, because we're socially responsible, we're a not only very good economic investment, but also a very good social investment. So that should not only affect investment, but it should also affect their product sales as well.
Right. Speaking very briefly, Mr. Zook, staying with what Professor Yang has just said, the assessment by Moody's gave Korea high marks for the social sector, which includes our education, health and service, but we scored relatively low with regard to population growth and aging. Do you share these concerns, Mr. Zook?
Certainly around population and aging, I think this will be one of the key challenges for Korea over the longer horizon. Certainly in terms of public finances is particularly how we view it, as well as economic growth. A declining population isn't necessarily great for medium-term potential growth if there's not an increase in productivity to help offset that. Now, the government has been focused on, through its Korean New Deal, trying to boost that productivity rate and try to offset some of the decline in growth, in medium-term growth. And so I think we have yet to see how successful those initiatives will be. But certainly that would also help with fiscal dynamics as well, as Korea will see rising fiscal pressures coming from that aging population and the spending that's needed to support that aging demographics. So yeah, I think it's going to be quite a challenge for Korea over the longer horizon, and something that we're certainly keeping an eye on at Fitch.
Right. And Professor Yang, pundits claim exports kept our economy afloat last year, especially that of information and communications technology-related products. Do you agree with this?
Yes. Semiconductors played a crucial part, and we've been, in a sense, very lucky, because at the beginning of last year, semiconductor exports were not looking very good because there were a substantial investment a year before and the year before that. So they thought that the crucial investments had already been made and semiconductor demand would fall relative to that. But because of the lockdown and the shutdown, people in other countries had to work from home. They also had to entertain themselves from home, so that vastly increased the sales of computers, that vastly increased investment in internet capabilities, internet servers, and people were getting entertainment from home. They required streaming services. So the demand for semiconductors, as well as demand for computers, which have been drying up for some time, just exploded last year, and that played a crucial part in maintaining Korea's growth rate. Now, toward the end of the year, what also happened was because of President Trump and China trade friction, the Huawei were forbidden to buy semiconductors beyond a certain time. I believe it was sometime in October. So before that, Huawei had to buy up a stock of semiconductors to get by, and that also helped Korea's export of semiconductors. As a result, the increase in the exports of semiconductors and computers played a really crucial part in maintaining Korea's exports last year.
I see. Meanwhile, Mr. Zook, you mentioned fiscal standing of Korea earlier on. What exactly is your assessment of Korea's fiscal standing, and do we have sufficient fiscal headroom, do you suppose?
Yeah, so I mean, as a result of Korea's history of very sound fiscal management, Korea came into the coronavirus pandemic with a reasonable amount of fiscal space, in our view, that allowed it to respond to the pandemic and provide that fiscal stimulus to offset the economic contraction without putting too much pressure on the rating. So right now, Korea's debt to GDP ratio is roughly in line with what the AA median is, a bit below that level. So there's still a bit of scope for Korea to use fiscal space going forward. Now, the government in its latest budget has proposed quite expansionary fiscal policy over the medium term. Over the next 5 years. Right now, debt to GDP is about 44%. It could rise to close to 60% over that next 5-year period. And so that increase in debt to GDP over the medium term could begin to put a bit more pressure on the rating, especially with regard to what I mentioned earlier about rising fiscal costs over the longer horizon related to population aging. So, our view is that in the short term, Korea still has fiscal space to work with, but there could be some pressures that emerge over the longer horizon.
I see. Professor Yang, what are your thoughts, meanwhile, with regard to calls on businesses here in the country to share their profits in return for incentives like tax reductions?
Okay, well, I'm not very favorable toward it. And the reason is that it seems like government is not doing their job. Now, Korea tries to maintain a welfare system. What welfare system partially does is whenever there's a large crisis, when there's a large shock to the system, it's supposed to act as insurance. And the government takes money from taxes and then it distributes that money through the social safety net, so we have basic infrastructure to do it. And well, if you use this profit sharing type of system, then it's based. How do these profit sharing system basically get money? Through government pressure, in large part political pressure. And you can say that, well, this time it's for a good cause, but you can get into very gray areas, like we've seen sometimes, at least from Samsung's claims of what happened to their vice chairman Lee Jae-yong. So rather than try to have this more informal type of system where you try to pressure the so-called profit-making companies to make contributions, a much better solution would be to do it by law, because that's what you're supposed to do to begin with. And that if you do it through law, so that you temporarily raise tax rates, then the advantage is that you protect both the politicians and the companies, because, well, companies can say that we paid more because the tax rates went up, and the politicians can say that this is not done for our own purposes, because the law puts very clearly how the money should be collected and where that money should go.
Right. Mr. Zhu, Korea is an export-oriented economy and thus dependent on its regional neighbors and beyond. Now, China noted an economic growth last year, despite the contractions posted in all other major economies. How does this reality look to affect Korea, do you suppose?
Yeah, well, I guess just starting from a broader global perspective, we've revised up our global growth forecast in 2021 as a result of the positive news on the vaccine front. And so Korea, as an export-oriented economy, should be quite well positioned, in our view, to take advantage of that global recovery. Now, as you mentioned, for China in particular, as Korea's key export market, we're forecasting a growth rate of 8% next year, and so certainly for Korea, that will be quite positive on the export front in terms of prospects. And as Professor Yang already mentioned, we've already seen Korean exports recover quite nicely in the second half of last year as the global economy emerged from recession. There may be a few bumps in the first quarter as we've seen more lockdowns in advanced economies around the world, but our view is that generally through 2021, Korea's export outlook should be quite positive, and that should sustain a recovery in Korea's GDP.
Right. And meanwhile, Professor Yang, what are your prospects for Korea's exports and economy with a Biden administration in office starting today?
Okay, well, first of all, as President Biden comes in, I think we can expect more stability and predictability, and that will have a positive contribution to economic environment in general and trade in particular. And then while there probably will be a lot of China-U.S. trade friction, at least it will be, I think, stabilized because it will be more predictable. So we'll have, well, Woori Financial Research Institute estimates that GDP will increase by 0.01% from increased exports, and then 0.02% from increased consumption and investment in Korea due to more favorable and stable economic environment. So the Biden effect will be about 0.03%. And then there's probably going to be the effect from the relief program in the United States, and probably the infrastructure plan, though that needs to pass Congress first. But especially if the infrastructure plan is passed through U.S. Congress, that means they're going to require a lot of, say, things like steel. And that may signal some good things about Korean steel exports. They may loosen the tariffs and quotas, and the relief effort and the large government expenditure increase may mean increased expenditure by U.S. consumers, which will be good for Korean exports, especially in the areas like automobiles.
Right. Right. Mr. Zook, officials here forecast an economic growth of within 3% for Korea this year. Do you share this outlook?
Yeah, our view is that 3% growth is quite achievable. Our own internal forecast is actually 3.8% for 2021. So we're certainly towards the higher end of consensus forecasts at the moment. And really the key driver of that growth is, as we've discussed, really on the external front. We do expect a gradual recovery in domestic demand as well, particularly as the vaccine is rolled out over the year and social distancing measures are able to be reduced later in 2021 at a more significant pace. So yeah, I think overall our view is that the government's forecasts are quite achievable, and we actually have a bit better prospects for Korea next year.
And very briefly speaking, Professor Yang, what are your prospects for Korea's economy for this year?
Okay, slightly less optimistic. And the reason is that Korea's government projection, 3.2% growth, is built on 8% export growth. That depends on how the global economy is doing. That in turn depends on how the vaccine distribution is going to go. So that's going to be one problem. Second problem is that in Korea, for the domestic economy to recover, we're going to have to increase vaccine distribution, and that's going to take time. The epidemiologists estimate that the herd immunity will take between 3 to 6 months from when the vaccination starts. So that's going to cover most of the year. So domestic economy, I'm a bit less optimistic than Mr. Juk.
I see. All right, Professor Yang, as always, thank you very much for your insights. And Mr. Zook, thank you very much for joining us live at this hour with your thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, COVID-19 cases may be on a decline here in the country, but chances of a rebound remain high, so do take care. I'll be back tomorrow with more coverage on the pandemic. See you then.